The bustling streets of New York City hold stories within stories, but for Jack Morgan, the real struggle was far from the noise outside his window. As a prominent advertising executive, Jack thought he knew the challenges life could bring, until tragedy struck, leaving him alone to care for his young daughter, Emily. Each morning, he grappled with memories of his beloved wife, Sarah, and the new weight of fatherhood, determined to keep her essence alive for their little girl. However, upon returning to work at his prestigious agency, Jack couldn't have imagined the arrival of Olivia Collins, a brilliant and ambitious new creative director. With her charm and charisma, Olivia quickly ignited something in Jack, a spark he hadn't felt since Sarah's passing. But this connection wouldn't be without complications. Emily, sensitive and wise beyond her years, soon noticed her father's bond with Olivia, awakening fears of losing her mother's memory. Would this connection between Jack and Olivia bring new happiness or create a distance between him and Emily, leading him to confront the delicate balance between honoring the past and embracing the future? Before we dive into this story of love, loss, and family, tell us where you're watching from. And if you enjoy tales full of unexpected twists and emotional resolutions, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories we share here. New York City buzzed with its usual morning hustle, but for Jack Morgan, the world seemed to have come to a standstill. Sitting in his apartment's kitchen, he held a coffee mug that had long since gone cold, his gaze lost in the empty space Sarah used to occupy. It had been 3 months since cancer took her away, 3 months of a daily struggle to maintain composure in front of his daughter Emily. The 8-year-old girl, with her big brown eyes and light olive skin, was the spitting image of her mother, a constant reminder of what they had lost. "Dad," Emily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "I'm ready for school." Jack blinked, returning to reality. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's go." The drive to school was silent. Jack glanced at his daughter, noticing how she hugged her backpack to her chest like a shield. As they arrived, Emily hesitated before getting out of the car. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think Mom is watching us from heaven?" The question hit Jack like a punch to the gut. "I'm sure she is, Em. Your Mom will always be with us, even if we can't see her." Emily nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I miss her so much." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." After dropping Emily off, Jack headed to his job at a major advertising firm. As he entered the office, his assistant intercepted him. "Mr. Morgan, the new creative director wants to see you in her office right away." Jack frowned. He didn't know they had hired someone new. As he entered the office, he came face to face with a woman who took his breath away. Tall, fair-skinned, with perfectly styled blonde hair, the woman smiled at him confidently. "Jack Morgan, I presume? I'm Olivia Collins, the new creative director." Jack shook her hand, noting the firmness of her grip. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Collins." "Please, call me Olivia," she said, her smile becoming warmer. "I've heard a lot about you, Jack. Your work is impressive." For the first time in months, Jack felt a spark of something that wasn't pain or sadness. "Thank you, Olivia. I hope we can work well together." "I'm sure we will," Olivia replied, her eyes shining with an intensity Jack couldn't decipher. "In fact, I have a new project that I think will be perfect for you." As Olivia began to talk about the project, Jack found himself captivated not only by her ideas, but by her presence. She was charismatic, intelligent, and seemed to understand exactly what he needed professionally. At the end of the day, Jack found himself smiling as he drove back home. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. However, upon arriving home and seeing Emily sitting quietly on the couch, hugging a photo of Sarah, guilt washed over him. How could he even think about smiling when his daughter was still suffering so much? "Hi, sweetheart," he said softly, sitting next to her. "How was your day?" Emily shrugged, her eyes fixed on the photo. "Normal, I guess." Jack put an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "You know what? How about we cook Mum's favorite recipe together tonight?" Emily's eyes lit up slightly. "The chicken pot pie?" "Exactly," Jack smiled. "And while we cook, we can tell stories about Mom. How does that sound?" Emily nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I like that idea, Dad." As father and daughter headed to the kitchen, Jack promised himself that no matter what happened, Emily would always be his priority. He didn't know that promise would be tested sooner than he imagined, nor that Olivia's appearance in his life would mark the beginning of a series of events that would change their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Slowly, a routine established itself in Jack and Emily's lives. Mornings began with hurried breakfasts and car rides filled with conversations about school and work. In the afternoons, father and daughter strived to keep Sarah's memory alive, cooking her favorite recipes or looking through photo albums together. At work, Jack found himself increasingly immersed in challenging projects under Olivia's direction. The new creative director had brought fresh energy to the agency, and Jack often found himself staying late, fascinated by the innovative ideas that emerged in their meetings. One night, as they worked on an important presentation, Olivia paused and looked at Jack curiously. "Jack," she said softly, "you've done incredible work these past few weeks, but I can't help but notice that sometimes you seem distant. Is everything okay?" Jack looked up from his computer, surprised by the question. For a moment, he considered giving an evasive answer, but something in Olivia's gaze made him feel safe. "The truth is, no," he admitted with a sigh. "I lost my wife a few months ago. Sarah, she was everything to me and our daughter, Emily. Some days are harder than others." Olivia moved closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I can't imagine how difficult it must be for you and your daughter." For the first time since Sarah's death, Jack felt that someone truly understood his pain. The words flowed, and before he knew it, he was telling Olivia about Sarah, about how they met in college, about her battle with cancer, and about the challenges of raising Emily alone. Olivia listened attentively, offering words of comfort and understanding. When Jack finished speaking, he realized that the sun had set and hours had passed. "Oh God," he said, looking at his watch. "I should have picked up Emily an hour ago. She must be worried." "Go," Olivia said with an understanding smile. "I'll finish up here." "Your family comes first." Jack thanked her and rushed out of the office. As he drove to the babysitter's house, he couldn't help but think about Olivia and how good it had felt to talk to her. When he arrived, he found Emily asleep on the couch. The babysitter, an older lady named Mrs. Johnson, looked at him with concern. "Mr. Morgan," she said quietly, "the little one was very restless. She asked about you several times." Guilt washed over Jack as he lifted Emily into his arms. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. It won't happen again." Back home, he tucked Emily into her bed. The girl woke up briefly. "Dad," she mumbled sleepily. "Where were you?" "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Jack said, stroking her hair. "Work ran later than expected, but I promise it won't happen again." Emily nodded and went back to sleep. Jack stayed watching her for a moment, noticing how much she looked like Sarah. Guilt returned, this time mixed with a feeling of confusion. Why had he felt so comfortable talking to Olivia? Was he betraying Sarah's memory by feeling this way? In the following days, Jack made an effort to spend more time with Emily. They went to the park, watched movies together, and even tried to bake a pie following Sarah's recipe, with disastrous but laughter-filled results. However, at work, Jack couldn't help but feel drawn to Olivia's presence. She always seemed to know what to say to cheer him up, and her enthusiasm for work was contagious. One afternoon, as they were reviewing a project, Olivia looked at Jack with a smile. "You know, you should bring Emily to the office sometime," she suggested. "I'd love to meet her." Jack was surprised by the suggestion, but the idea appealed to him. "That would be great. Emily would love to see where her dad works." "Perfect," Olivia said, her smile widening. "Why don't you bring her on Friday? We could all go out for dinner after work." Jack agreed, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. On one hand, he was eager for Emily to meet Olivia. On the other, a small voice in his head wondered if he wasn't moving too fast. That night, as he tucked Emily in, he told her about the plan for Friday. "I'm going to your work?" Emily asked, her eyes shining with excitement. "Yes, sweetheart," Jack replied. "And you're going to meet my boss, Olivia. She's really looking forward to meeting you." Emily's smile faltered for a moment. "Is she your friend?" Jack hesitated before answering. "Yes, I guess you could say she's my friend. She's a very kind person." Emily nodded slowly, but Jack noticed that something had changed in her expression. Before he could ask, Emily turned over in bed. "Good night, Dad," she said quietly. "Good night, sweetheart," Jack replied, kissing her forehead. As he closed Emily's bedroom door, Jack couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Was he doing the right thing by introducing Olivia into their lives? How would Emily really react to meeting her? With these thoughts swirling in his head, Jack went to sleep, not knowing that Friday would mark the beginning of a drastic change in their lives. Friday arrived faster than Jack had expected. The morning passed in a whirlwind of activity, preparing breakfast, making sure Emily had everything she needed for the afternoon at the office, and trying to calm his own nerves. Emily was unusually quiet during the drive to school. Jack watched her in the rearview mirror, noticing how she fidgeted with the edge of her new dress, a gift he had bought especially for the occasion. "Are you excited about coming to the office today, Em?" Jack asked, trying to break the silence. Emily nodded without looking up. "Yes, Dad." Jack frowned, concerned about his daughter's lack of enthusiasm. "Is something wrong, sweetheart? You know you can tell me anything." For a moment, it seemed like Emily was going to say something, but then she shook her head. "It's nothing, Dad. I'm just a little nervous." Jack wanted to probe further, but they had already arrived at the school. He said goodbye to Emily with a kiss and the promise to pick her up early. The day at the office flew by. Jack found himself constantly checking the clock, torn between anticipation and anxiety. When it was time to pick up Emily, Olivia appeared at his office door. "Ready for the big meeting?" she asked with a radiant smile. Jack nodded, returning her smile. "Yes. Although I admit I'm a bit nervous." "Don't worry," Olivia said, gently touching his arm. "Everything will be fine. I'm sure Emily is a lovely girl." Olivia's gesture sent a wave of warmth through Jack, momentarily calming his nerves. However, as he drove to Emily's school, the unease returned. Emily was waiting at the school entrance, her backpack clutched to her chest. Upon seeing her father, she ran to the car. "Hi." "Sweetheart," Jack greeted as Emily buckled her seatbelt. "Ready to see where Dad works?" Emily nodded, but Jack noticed that her eyes were slightly red, as if she had been crying. "Em, did something happen at school?" he asked with concern. "No," Emily replied quickly. "I'm fine, Dad." Jack wanted to press further, but decided to let it go for the moment. The rest of the trip passed in an uncomfortable silence. Upon arriving at the office, Jack took Emily's hand and guided her through the bustling lobby. The girl's eyes widened in awe at the colorful posters and huge screens decorating the walls. "Wow," Emily exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her nervousness. "Do you make all this, Dad?" Jack smiled, relieved to see his daughter animated. "Well, I help, but there are a lot of talented people who work here." When they reached Jack's office floor, Olivia was waiting for them. She wore an elegant white suit that contrasted with her perfectly styled blonde hair. Her smile widened upon seeing Emily. "You must be Emily," Olivia exclaimed, crouching down to be at the girl's eye level. "Your dad has told me so much about you." "I'm Olivia. It's a pleasure to meet you." Emily, suddenly shy, partially hid behind Jack. "Hello," she murmured. Jack placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Em, this is Olivia. My boss I told you about." Olivia, without losing her smile, continued. "You know, your dad told me you love to draw. How about I show you some of the drawings we're working on?" Emily's eyes lit up slightly at the mention of drawings, and she nodded cautiously. Olivia gave them a tour of the office, showing them the latest projects and introducing Emily to some of the designers. Gradually, Emily began to relax, so even asking some questions about the drawings and advertisements. However, Jack couldn't help but notice how Emily tensed every time Olivia got too close or casually touched Jack. At one point, when Olivia placed her hand on Jack's arm as they laughed at a joke, Emily frowned and tightly gripped her father's hand. After the tour, Olivia suggested going to dinner at a nearby restaurant. Emily looked at her father with an expression that clearly said she preferred to go home. But Jack, eager for his daughter and Olivia to get to know each other better, accepted the invitation. At the restaurant, Olivia did her best to include Emily in the conversation, asking about school and her hobbies. Emily responded politely, but with monosyllables, her gaze alternating between her plate of food and her father. "So, Emily," Olivia said at one point, "what do you like to do with your dad at home?" Emily looked up, her eyes shining for the first time that night. "We like to cook together. We make Mom's recipes." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Jack saw Olivia's smile falter for a second before recovering. "Oh, that sounds wonderful," Olivia said, her voice slightly tense. "It must be very special for you both." Emily nodded, looking at her father with a mixture of sadness and something Jack couldn't decipher. Was it reproach? The rest of the dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. When they finally said goodbye to Olivia and got in the car to go home, Jack felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. It hadn't gone as well as he had hoped. "What did you think of Olivia?" he asked cautiously as he drove. Emily shrugged, looking out the window. "She's pretty," she finally said. Jack waited, but Emily didn't add anything else. The silence stretched between them, heavy and loaded with unexpressed emotions. When they got home, Emily ran straight to her room. Jack followed, worried. "Em, are you okay?" he asked, standing in the doorway. Emily was sitting on her bed, hugging a photo of Sarah. She looked up at her father, her eyes full of tears. "Dad," she said with a trembling voice, "don't you love Mom anymore?" The question hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. He quickly approached the bed, wrapping Emily in a hug. "Oh, of course I do, sweetheart," he said, his own voice breaking. "I'll always love your mom. Nothing will change that." Emily sobbed against his chest. "Then why do you spend so much time with Olivia? Why do you smile when you're with her?" Jack realized at that moment how much he had underestimated his daughter's feelings. While he had been dealing with his own pain and confusion, Emily had been observing, interpreting, fearing. "Oh, Em," he sighed, stroking her hair. "Olivia is just a friend and my boss. No one could ever replace your mom, ever, I promise." Emily nodded, but Jack could feel that she wasn't entirely convinced. As he cradled her, promising that everything would be okay, he couldn't help but wonder if he was really handling things the right way. That night, after Emily had finally fallen asleep, Jack sat in the living room, looking at an old photo of Sarah. What would she think of all this? Was he doing the right thing by letting Olivia into their lives? With these questions swirling in his mind, Jack fell asleep on the couch, not knowing that things were about to get even more complicated. The following weeks brought an apparent calm. Jack, aware of Emily's reaction, made a conscious effort to spend more time with her. Weekends were filled with trips to the park, visits to the zoo, and movie marathons at home. Gradually, Emily's smile began to reappear more frequently. At work, Jack maintained a cordial but professional relationship with Olivia. She seemed to understand the situation without needing many explanations, giving him the space he needed. However, Jack couldn't deny the spark of excitement he felt every time they worked together on a project. One Friday afternoon, as Jack was gathering his things to go home, Olivia appeared at his office door. "Jack," she said with a warm smile, "the team is planning a dinner to celebrate the success of our latest campaign. I was wondering if you'd like to come." Jack hesitated. "I don't know, Olivia. I'd have to find a babysitter for Emily and—" "I understand," Olivia interrupted gently. "But you've worked so hard on this project. You deserve to celebrate a little." After a moment of reflection, Jack nodded. "You're right. I'll see if Mrs. Johnson can watch Emily." The dinner turned out to be more enjoyable than Jack had expected. Surrounded by his colleagues, he found himself laughing and enjoying himself in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. Olivia, seated next to him, kept the conversation flowing with her usual charisma. As the night progressed and the wine flowed, Jack found himself sharing anecdotes about Sarah and Emily. Olivia listened attentively, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of compassion and something else Jack couldn't identify. When dinner ended, Olivia offered to share a taxi with Jack as they lived in the same direction. On the ride, the silence between them was charged with unresolved tension. "Thanks for convincing me to come," Jack finally said. I really needed this, Olivia smiled, gently placing her hand on his. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Jack, I want you to know that I'm here for you. Not just as your boss, but as a friend. Jack looked at their joined hands, feeling a mixture of warmth and guilt. Before he could respond, the taxi stopped in front of his building. Thank you, Olivia, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Good night. As he entered his apartment, Jack found Mrs. Johnson dozing on the couch. He gently woke her up and thanked her for watching Emily. The little one was restless. Mrs. Johnson murmured as she gathered her things. She asked about you several times. Guilt hit Jack hard. He headed to Emily's room and found her awake, hugging her favorite teddy bear. Hi, sweetheart, he said softly. Why aren't you asleep? Emily looked at him with accusing eyes. You said you'd be back early. Jack sat on the edge of the bed, stroking his daughter's hair. I know. I'm sorry. Work ran later than expected. Were you with her? Emily asked, her voice barely audible. With who, Em? With Olivia, the girl replied, pronouncing the name as if it were a forbidden word. Jack felt as if he'd been doused with cold water. Em, we've talked about this. Olivia is just my boss and... No, Emily interrupted, tears forming in her eyes. She wants to take Mom's place, I know it. No, sweetheart, it's not like that, Jack tried to explain, but Emily had already turned away, burying her face in the pillow. That night, Jack could barely sleep. Emily's words echoed in his mind, mixing with guilt and confusion about his feelings toward Olivia. The following days were tense. Emily became more withdrawn, responding with monosyllables and avoiding spending time with her father. Jack, for his part, immersed himself in work, trying to ignore the growing chasm between him and his daughter. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents in his office, Olivia entered without warning. Jack, she said, her voice laden with concern, is everything okay? You've been distant these days. Jack looked up, noticing the genuine worry in Olivia's eyes. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, but something held him back. I'm fine, he lied, forcing a smile. Just a little tired. Olivia didn't seem convinced. She moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. You know you can trust me. Right? Olivia's touch sent an electric current through Jack. For a brief instant, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to let go, to allow himself to feel something for someone else after Sarah. But then, the image of Emily, with her eyes full of tears and reproach, appeared in his mind. I know, he finally said, gently pulling away. Thank you, Olivia. That night, determined to reconnect with his daughter, Jack prepared Emily's favorite dinner. As they ate, he tried to start a conversation. How about we go to the amusement park this weekend, he suggested, hopeful. Emily looked up from her plate, a spark of interest in her eyes. Just the two of us. Of course, Jack assured. Like old times. For the first time in days, Emily smiled genuinely. I'd like that, Dad. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Maybe, he thought, things would finally start to get better. However, as he collected the plates, he couldn't help but notice the drawing Emily had left on the table. In it, 3 figures, Jack, Emily, and a dark-haired woman who could only be Sarah. Sarah's figure was surrounded by a golden halo, while in the background, barely visible, was a dark shadow with blonde hair. Jack felt a lump in his throat. The drawing was a clear reflection of his daughter's fears and anxieties. He realized that, although things seemed to be improving on the surface, there was still a long way to go. As he put the drawing away in a drawer, promising himself to talk to Emily about it another time, Jack couldn't help but wonder how he would balance his own emotional needs with those of his daughter. And in the back of his mind, a question persisted. What role would Olivia really play in their lives? The weekend at the amusement park was like a breath of fresh air for Jack and Emily. For a few hours, they were able to forget their worries and simply enjoy each other's company. Emily's laughter on the roller coaster, her excitement at winning a stuffed animal at one of the games, and the way she clung to her father during the haunted house ride, all reminded Jack of what truly mattered in his life. However, reality awaited them upon returning home. Monday morning found Jack back in the office. immersed in a new high-profile project. Olivia was more present than ever, her energy and enthusiasm contagious. "Jack," she said one day, entering his office with a radiant smile, "I have exciting news. We've been selected to present the campaign at the National Advertising Conference next month." Jack felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "That's incredible, Olivia. But the conference is in Los Angeles, right? We'd be away for an entire week." Olivia's smile faltered for a moment. "I know it's a lot to ask, especially with Emily, but this is a unique opportunity, Jack. It could be a big boost for your career." Jack ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. "I don't know, Olivia. I'd have to think about it." "Of course," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "Take your time. But think about what this could mean for you. For both of you." That night, while having dinner with Emily, Jack decided to broach the subject. He began. "There's something I want to talk to you about." Emily looked up from her plate, her big brown eyes fixed on her father. "An important opportunity has come up at work," Jack continued. "I would have to travel for a week next month. What do you think about staying with Grandma while I'm away?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily slowly put down her fork, her expression turning somber. "Are you going with her?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. We've talked about this. Olivia is my boss, nothing more." "You're lying," Emily shouted, abruptly standing up. "You're always with her. You don't love me anymore." Before Jack could react, Emily ran to her room, slamming the door shut. Jack sat there, stunned. How had they come to this point? How could his daughter think he didn't love her anymore? After giving Emily a few minutes to calm down, Jack headed to her room. He gently knocked on the door. Can I come in?" There was no response, but the door wasn't locked. Jack slowly entered. Emily was sitting on her bed, hugging a photo of Sarah. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Sweetheart," Jack said softly, sitting next to her, "I'm so sorry for making you feel this way. You're the most important thing in my life, and you know that, right?" Emily sobbed, clutching the photo tighter. "But you don't spend time with me anymore. You're always working or with her." Jack felt his heart breaking. He wrapped Emily in a hug, kissing the top of her head. "I'm so sorry, Em. You're right. I've been very busy lately. But I promise that's going to change. You're my priority, always." "Do you promise?" Emily asked, looking at him with hopeful eyes. "I promise," Jack assured. "In fact, how about we skip that trip and plan a vacation just for the two of us instead?" The smile that lit up Emily's face was all the answer Jack needed. However, the next morning, when Jack communicated his decision to Olivia, her reaction took him by surprise. "Are you sure that's the best thing, Jack?" Olivia asked, her tone mixing concern and disappointment. "I understand that Emily is your priority, but you also have to think about your future, about both of your futures." "I know," Jack replied, feeling inexplicably guilty. "But Emily needs me now." Olivia moved closer, her perfume enveloping Jack. "Jack, you've worked so hard. You deserve this opportunity. Maybe we could find a solution that works for everyone." For a moment, Jack allowed himself to imagine what it could be like. Success in his career, the admiration of his colleagues, the closeness with Olivia. But then, the image of Emily alone and feeling abandoned appeared in his mind. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he finally said, taking a step back. "My decision is made." Olivia nodded slowly, a shadow of something indecipherable crossing her face. "I understand, but remember, Jack, you can't put your life on hold forever. At some point, you'll have to think about yourself too." As Jack left Olivia's office, he couldn't help but feel that something had changed between them. An invisible but palpable crack had formed. That night, as he watched Emily sleep peacefully, Jack wondered if he had made the right decision. Was he really doing what was best for his daughter, or was he allowing fear and guilt to dictate his actions? And deep in his mind, a question persisted. What would Sarah have wanted him to do? The days following Jack's decision not to attend the conference in Los Angeles brought a mix of emotions. On one hand, his relationship with Emily seemed to be improving. The girls' smiles were more frequent, and evenings were filled with conversations and laughter as they planned their upcoming vacation together. However, at the office, The atmosphere had subtly changed. Olivia, though professional as always, maintained a distance that Jack couldn't help but notice. Projects continued, but the long chats and moments of complicity seemed to be a thing of the past. One afternoon, as Jack was working in his office, Olivia entered with an envelope in her hand. "Jack," she said, her voice neutral, "this just arrived for you. It's from the conference in Los Angeles." Jack took the envelope, feeling a knot in his stomach. Upon opening it, he found a formal invitation to be one of the keynote speakers at the event. "Science, this is incredible," he murmured, looking at the paper with a mixture of pride and remorse. Olivia leaned on the desk, her eyes fixed on him. "It's a unique opportunity, Jack. You could establish yourself as one of the leading voices in the industry." Jack put the invitation on the desk, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but Emily," Olivia finished for him, a touch of frustration in her voice. "Jack, I understand that your daughter is your priority, but have you considered that maybe, in the long run, this could benefit her too? A successful and fulfilled father can offer more to his daughter." Olivia's words resonated in Jack's mind. Was he really doing the best for Emily by rejecting these opportunities? Or was he letting fear and guilt dictate his decisions? "I need to think about it," he finally said. Olivia nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "So of course, take your time. But remember, sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the sake of those we love." That night, as he had dinner with Emily, Jack couldn't help but observe his daughter with new eyes. She chatted animatedly about her day at school, her eyes shining with a joy that had been absent for a long time. Jack said during a pause in the conversation, "are you happy?" Emily looked at him, surprised by the question. "Of course I am." "Dad, why do you ask?" Jack smiled, but felt a pang of guilt. "I just want to make sure I'm doing what's best for you." "You're with me," Emily replied simply. "That's the best thing." His daughter's words warmed Jack's heart, but also fueled his internal conflict. Was he really doing what was best for Emily by limiting his own professional opportunities? The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and doubts for Jack. On one hand, the idea of the conference in Los Angeles and the opportunities it could bring excited him. On the other, the image of Emily feeling abandoned tormented him. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents at home, Jack found himself looking at an old photo of Sarah. Her radiant smile seemed to challenge him, as if asking what he was doing with his life. "What would you do, Sarah?" he murmured, running a finger over his late wife's image. As if the universe had heard his question, the phone rang at that moment. It was Emily's teacher. "Mr. Morgan," said the voice on the other end of the line, "I was wondering if we could talk about Emily. There have been some incidents at school that concern me." Jack's heart raced. "What kind of incidents?" "Well," the teacher continued, "Emily has been more withdrawn lately. And today she drew something quite disturbing during art class." Jack felt the world stop. "What did she draw?" "It was an image of a family," the teacher explained cautiously. "But there was a dark figure in the background, like a threatening shadow. When I asked her about it, Emily refused to talk." After hanging up, Jack stared at the phone, a whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. How had he not noticed that Emily was still struggling? Had he been so absorbed in his own dilemmas that he had overlooked the signs? At that moment, Emily entered the room, her backpack hanging from one shoulder. "Hi, Dad," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the weight his daughter was carrying. Without a word, he pulled her into a tight hug. "I love you, Em," he whispered. "More than anything in this world." Emily clung to him, and Jack felt her trembling slightly. "I love you too, Dad." In that moment, Jack made a decision. The conference, the professional opportunities, even Olivia, all of that could wait. What Emily needed now was her father, fully present and dedicated. "How about we start planning our vacation?" he suggested, pulling away slightly to look Emily in the eyes. The genuine smile that lit up his daughter's face was all the confirmation Jack needed. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that he would have to find a balance between his responsibilities as a father and his professional aspirations. But at that moment, with Emily in his arms, he knew he was making the right decision. However, a small voice in the back of his mind reminded him that decisions have consequences, and that the path he was choosing might have repercussions he couldn't yet foresee. Jack's decision to prioritize Emily over his career brought a momentary peace to their home. The following weeks were filled with moments of connection between father and daughter, board game nights, weekend walks in the park, and long conversations about everything and nothing at all. However, at the office, things were far from peaceful. Jack's absence from the Los Angeles conference didn't go unnoticed, and whispers from his colleagues followed him through the hallways. Olivia, for her part, maintained a professional but distant attitude, their interactions limited to what was strictly necessary for work. One morning, as Jack was reviewing some reports in his office, Olivia entered without announcement. "Jack," she said, her voice tense, "we need to talk." He looked up, noticing the seriousness on her face. "What's going on, Olivia?" She closed the door behind her and sat across from him. "So the board isn't happy with your decision not to attend the conference. They're questioning your commitment to the company." Jack felt as if he'd been doused with cold water. "But the project went well. We've met all the objectives." "I know," Olivia replied, her tone softening slightly, "and I've done everything I can to defend you, but they need to see more from you, Jack. They need to know you're willing to go that extra mile." "My daughter needs me," Jack said, frustration evident in his voice. "I can't just—" "No one's asking you to abandon your daughter," Olivia interrupted, "but you have to find a balance for the sake of your career and for Emily's long-term benefit." Olivia's words stayed with Jack for the rest of the day, weighing on him like a dark cloud. When he picked Emily up from school that afternoon, he struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy, but his mind was elsewhere. "Dad," Emily said during dinner, pulling Jack from his thoughts. "Are you okay? You seem sad." Jack forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired from work." Emily looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Is it because of that lady, Olivia?" The question took Jack by surprise. "Why do you ask that, Em?" "Because whenever you mention her, I'll get sadder," Emily replied with wisdom beyond her years. Jack was speechless for a moment. Had he been that transparent? "No, sweetheart. Olivia is just my boss. Things at work are complicated sometimes." Emily nodded, but Jack could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "You know, the teacher told us today that sometimes adults have to make hard decisions for the good of their families." Emily's words resonated in Jack's mind, mixing with Olivia's. Was he really doing what was best for his family by rejecting professional opportunities? That night, after tucking Emily in, Jack found himself looking at old photos of Sarah. In one of them, taken shortly before she fell ill, Sarah smiled radiantly next to an award she had won at work. "What would you do, Sarah?" Jack murmured, running a finger over the image. "How did you balance it all?" As if the universe wanted to answer him, the phone rang at that moment. It was Mike, his best friend and former co-worker. "Jack, buddy," Mike said, his voice mixed with the background noise of a bar. "How are you? It's been a while since we talked." Jack sighed. "It's been complicated times, Mike." I know, his friend replied. "Hey, I heard about the conference in Los Angeles. What happened?" For the next hour, Jack poured his heart out to Mike, telling him about his work dilemmas, his concerns about Emily, and his internal conflicts about Olivia. "Look, Jack," Mike finally said, "I get it, I really do. But you have to think about the future. Emily needs a strong, fulfilled father. You can't put your life on hold forever." Mike's words, so similar to Olivia's, made Jack question himself once again. Was he really doing the right thing? The next day, at the office, Jack gathered his courage and went to talk to Olivia. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, closing the door to Olivia's office behind him. "About finding a balance." Olivia looked at him, a spark of hope in her eyes. "And I want to try," Jack said. "I want to prove my commitment to the company, but without neglecting Emily." A smile spread across Olivia's face. "I'm so happy to hear that, Jack. Together we'll find a way to make it work." As Olivia began to talk about upcoming projects and opportunities, Jack felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that he would have to juggle his responsibilities like never before. But in the back of his mind, a small voice reminded him that every decision has consequences and that the delicate balance he was trying to maintain could break at any moment. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Jack. On one hand, he immersed himself fully in new projects at work, staying late at the office and taking on more responsibilities. Olivia was delighted with his renewed commitment, and the chemistry between them seemed to have returned to its peak. On the other hand, Jack strived to keep his promise to Emily. He carefully scheduled his time to ensure he was present for dinners, helping her with homework, and spending weekends together. However, fatigue was beginning to take its toll, and he often found himself struggling to stay awake during movie nights with his daughter. One evening, as Jack was working on his laptop in the living room, Emily approached quietly. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" Jack looked up, noticing the concern in his daughter's eyes. He immediately closed the laptop. "Of course, sweetheart. What's up?" Emily sat beside him, nervously fidgeting with the edge of her pajamas. "It's just, lately you seem very tired, and sometimes, when we're together, I feel like your mind is somewhere else." Emily's words were like a dagger to Jack's heart. Had his exhaustion been that obvious? "Oh, Em," he said, pulling her close in a hug. "I'm so sorry, I've been working a lot lately, but that's no excuse. You're the most important thing to me." Emily looked at him, her eyes full of a maturity that sometimes scared Jack. "I know, Dad, but I also know that your work is important. I don't want you to forget about yourself." Jack was speechless for a moment. How could his little girl be so perceptive? "I promise I'll find a better balance," he finally said. "You and me against the world, remember." Emily smiled, but Jack noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. The next day at the office, Jack found himself distracted. Emily's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the demands of work and Olivia's constant presence. "Jack!" Olivia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you okay? You seem worried." He looked at her, noticing the genuine concern in her eyes. For a moment, he considered telling her everything, sharing his fears and doubts, but something held him back. "I'm fine," he lied, forcing a smile. "I was just thinking about the next project." Olivia didn't seem entirely convinced, but let it go. "Well, speaking of projects, I have exciting news. The board is considering sending both of us to Chicago for an important presentation. It would only be for a week, but it could be a big step for your career." Jack's heart raced. A week in Chicago. The opportunity was incredible, but a week away from Emily. "I need to think about it," he finally said. Olivia nodded, but Jack noticed a flash of disappointment in her eyes. "Of course, take your time, but not too much. We need to give an answer soon." That night, as he had dinner with Emily, Jack decided to broach the subject. "Em," he began, "what would you think if I had to travel for work for a week?" Emily dropped her fork, the sound resonating in the sudden silence of the kitchen. "You're going away?" "It's not certain yet," Jack hurried to clarify. "I'm just considering the options." Emily lowered her gaze, playing with her food. "Is it because of her? Because of Olivia?" Jack felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "No, Em, it's for work. Olivia is just my boss, I've told you that." "But you're always talking about her," Emily muttered. "And now you want to leave." "Em, look at me," Jack said, gently taking his daughter's hand. "You are the most important thing in my life. Always. If you don't want me to go, I won't go." Emily looked at him, her eyes full of unshed tears. "I want you to be happy, Dad, but I also want you here with me." Emily's words weighed on Jack for the rest of the night. As he tucked her in for bed, he noticed a drawing on her bedside table. It was an image of the two of them smiling, but in the background was a dark shadow with blonde hair. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Was this how Emily saw Olivia? As a threat to their family. That night, lying in his bed, Jack found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, the opportunity in Chicago could catapult his career. On the other, the idea of leaving Emily, of possibly damaging their relationship even further, terrified him. As he stared at the ceiling, an idea began to form in his mind. Maybe Maybe there was a way to do both, to be the father Emily needed and the professional he aspired to be. With that idea swirling in his head, Jack finally fell asleep, not knowing that the decisions he would make in the coming days would change the course of their lives forever. The next morning, Jack woke up with renewed determination. He had spent much of the night thinking, and he believed he had found a solution that could satisfy both his work responsibilities and his family commitments. During breakfast, he observed Emily carefully. The girl ate in silence, occasionally glancing at her father. Jack began, "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about last night." Emily looked up, her eyes full of anticipation and fear. "How would you feel about coming with me to Chicago?" Emily's eyes widened. "Really?" Jack nodded, a smile forming on his face. "Yes, it could be like a mini vacation for us. I'd work during the day, but we'd have the evenings and the weekend to explore the city together." The idea had come to him in the middle of the night. If he could convince the company to allow him to bring Emily, he could fulfill his work obligations without sacrificing time with his daughter. "What about school?" Emily asked, though the excitement in her voice was evident. "I'll talk to your teacher. I'm sure we can arrange it so you don't fall behind," Jack replied. "What do you say? Would you like to come with me?" The smile that lit up Emily's face was all the answer Jack needed. With renewed optimism, Jack headed to the office, determined to present his proposal to Olivia and the management team. However, upon arrival, he encountered an unexpected scene. Olivia was in her office and surrounded by papers and with a worried expression on her face. "Jack, good thing you're here," she said upon seeing him. "We have a situation." For the next hour, Olivia explained that complications had arisen with the Chicago client. The presentation had been moved up, and now they needed to leave in 2 days instead of next week. Jack's heart sank. His carefully planned solution was crumbling before his eyes. "I know it's sudden," Olivia continued, "but this is a crucial opportunity for the company, and for you. I need to know if you can do it, Jack." Jack ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "Olivia, I just promised Emily I'd take her with me. I can't just—" Olivia's expression hardened slightly. "Jack, I understand your situation, but this is important. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for our careers." "My daughter is not a sacrifice," Jack replied, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. A tense silence settled between them. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice soft, but with a tone Jack couldn't decipher. "Jack, I've been patient. I've tried to understand your situation, but I need to know if you're really committed to this job, to us." The word "us" hung in the air, loaded with implications that Jack had been avoiding facing. "What do you mean by us?" he asked, though deep down he knew the answer. Olivia moved closer, her perfume enveloping Jack. "You know what I mean. What's between us? It's more than just a work relationship. You've felt it too, haven't you?" Jack took a step back, feeling as if the floor was moving beneath his feet. "Olivia, But before he could respond, the office door burst open. It was Emily, with tears in her eyes and an expression of betrayal on her face. "Emily!" Jack exclaimed, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "You forgot your lunch," the girl said between sobs, holding a lunchbox. "Grandma brought me to give it to you." "But—" Jack watched in horror as his daughter's eyes moved between him and Olivia, comprehending the scene she had just witnessed. It's not what you think," Jack began, but Emily had already run out of the office. Without thinking twice, Jack ran after her, leaving Olivia calling after him from the doorway. He found Emily in the building's lobby, hugging her grandmother, Sarah's mother. "What's going on?" the older woman asked, confused by the scene. Jack, panting, looked at his daughter and then at his mother-in-law. At that moment, everything became clear to him. The decisions he had been postponing, the commitments he had been trying to maintain, all converged at this instant. "We need to talk," he finally said, his voice laden with emotion. "All of us." As he guided Emily and her grandmother out of the building, Jack knew that the next few hours would be crucial. He would have to face uncomfortable truths, make difficult decisions, and above all, reconnect with what really mattered in his life. The shadow of Olivia, the weight of his career, and the future he had imagined for himself all seemed to fade in the face of the reality of his crying daughter and the memory of Sarah that his mother-in-law represented. The family diner where Jack used to take Sarah during their early dates seemed like the appropriate place for the conversation he was about to have. Seated at a secluded table, Jack, Emily, and Helen, Sarah's mother, formed a triangle of contained emotions and unspoken words. Emily, with reddened eyes, stared fixedly at her hot chocolate. Helen, for her part, alternated her gaze between her granddaughter and her son-in-law, a mixture of concern and reproach in her eyes. "I think you owe us an explanation, Jack," Helen began, breaking the tense silence. Jack took a deep breath. "You're right. I owe you more than an explanation. I owe you an apology and the truth." For the next hour, Jack opened up like he hadn't in months. He talked about his pain over losing Sarah, about the pressure at work, about how Olivia had filled a void he didn't even know existed. But he also spoke of his unconditional love for Emily, and how at some point along the way, he had lost his bearings. "Em," he said, turning to his daughter, "I'm so sorry. I've been so focused on trying to be a good father and a good professional that I forgot the most important thing, being present, really present, for you." Emily looked up, her eyes full of tears. "Don't you love Mum anymore?" The question hit Jack like a punch to the stomach. "Oh, sweetheart, of course I do. I'll always love your mum. Olivia." Olivia was a mistake. I confused gratitude and friendship with something more, something that can never replace what I had with your mother. Helen, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. "Jack, I understand you've been dealing with a lot, but Emily needs you. Sarah needs you, even though she's no longer with us." Her words, laden with emotion, made Jack realize how much he had been drifting away not only from Emily, but also from Sarah's memory. "You're right," he said, taking Emily's and Helen's hands. "I've been so focused on moving forward that I forgot to honor the past and live in the present. That ends today." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to test his determination, Jack's phone rang. It was Olivia. Without hesitation, Jack rejected the call and turned off the phone. "What's going to happen now, Dad?" Emily asked, her voice small but hopeful. Jack smiled, feeling for the first time in a long time that he was making the right decision. "Now, sweetheart, we're going to start over. You and me as a team, and with Grandma Helen helping us along the way." Helen nodded, a smile forming on her lips. "I'll always be here for you both." Sarah would have wanted it that way. The following days were a whirlwind of changes. Jack submitted his resignation at the company, explaining that he needed time to reconnect with his family. Olivia tried to convince him to reconsider, but Jack stood firm in his decision. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he told her in their last conversation, "but my family is my priority. It always should have been." With Helen's support, Jack began to look for new job opportunities that would allow for a better balance between work and family. Meanwhile, he dedicated all his free time to Emily, rediscovering the joy of being a father. Together, they visited Sarah's favorite places in the city, cooked her preferred recipes, and most importantly, talked. They talked about the past, about their fears and hopes for the future. One afternoon, as they strolled through the park where Jack and Sarah used to take Emily when she was little, the girl stopped in front of a familiar tree. "This is where Mom and you carved your initials," Emily said, running her fingers over the marks in the bark. Jack felt a lump in his throat. "That's right, sweetheart. Your mum used to say this tree was a witness to our love." Emily looked at him, an idea forming in her eyes. "Can we carve something too?" With tears in his eyes, Jack nodded. Together, they carved a small heart next to Sarah and Jack's initials. Inside the heart, they engraved E+J+S forever. "Now Mum will always be with us," Emily said, hugging her father. Jack held her close, feeling for the first time in a long time that they were on the right path. "Doris, she always has been, sweetheart, and she always will be." As they walked away from the tree, Jack looked up at the sky, a feeling of peace enveloping him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges and difficult moments. But he also knew that, with Emily by his side and Sarah's memory guiding them, they could face anything. The sun was setting on the horizon, bathing the park in golden hues. Jack and Emily walked hand in hand, their shadows stretching behind them, and for a moment, if one looked closely, it seemed as if a third shadow accompanied them, silently watching over them.